Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we're breaking down Choi Won-hyok's incredible academic research on how the East and the West defined reality itself. We're going to explore how, looking at the exact same universe through two entirely different philosophical lenses, shaped human history, and more importantly, how these differing views of the material world are actively driving the modern crises we're facing today. I mean, it's literally the most fundamental question of human existence, right? Before we had supercomputers and particle accelerators, early philosophers just looked up at the stars, looked down at the dirt, and asked, what is all of this actually made of? And the way our ancestors answered that single question set the stage for two completely different historical trajectories. To really wrap our heads around this, we need to introduce a two lenses concept. Imagine early thinkers looking at the exact same universe. The West essentially picked up a microscope. They wanted to zoom way in and see the physical, independent building blocks of reality, what we call the substance. The East, on the other hand, picked up a wide-angle lens. They weren't looking for isolated blocks at all. They were looking for connections, relationships, and the changing properties between things. So let's look at Section 1, the Western lens, a world of substance. In Dr. Choi's research, we run into this foundational concept of Jisoo Hua-peng. This is an ancient theory that built the world out of four substantial, independent elements: earth, water, fire, and wind. Now, the absolute key takeaway here is that to the Western mind, these four elements weren't just poetic metaphors. They were literal, tangible building blocks. Think of them exactly the same way we think of Lego bricks today. They were physical, independent entities that you stack together to make up the world around us. Now, this substantialist worldview didn't just happen overnight. It was a slow, centuries-long process of entrenchment. You start with Thales back in the day, believing everything fundamentally comes from a single material substance like water. Then you move through Empedocles, who systematized the four distinct elements, then onto Plato, who linked those elements to an ideal world, and finally to Aristotle, who added concepts like form and ether. Step by step, the West permanently locked in this idea of a material, entity-based universe. And this habit of boxing reality into isolated Lego bricks, it wasn't just for science. It dominated all of society and permeated the entire Indo-European mindset. The historian George Dumézil actually proved this with his trifunctional system, showing how this structural thinking popped up everywhere, especially in mythology. Society was entirely compartmentalized into distinct functions. You had an upper layer for religion, represented by Hera, a middle layer for military and politics, represented by Athena, and a lower layer for production, represented by Aphrodite. Everything had its own distinct, isolated box. We can even see this highly structured thinking mirrored in how they mapped out the cosmos itself, creating strict spatial divisions between heaven, earth, and humanity. But here's where it gets really fascinating. Both the East and the West actually divided the cosmos using a very similar three-part structure. The difference is, they filled that structure with entirely different interpretations. Which brings us to Section 2, the Eastern lens, a world of attributes. Okay, so put the microscope down and pick up the wide-angle lens. To the East, reality just wasn't about static things. It was about the flowing attributes and correlational energies between those things. Rooted in yin-yang and the five elements, the Eastern worldview didn't care about slicing matter down into its smallest physical components. Instead, it prioritized how phenomena changed, how energies balanced out, and how literally everything in the universe was deeply interrelated. So here is the absolute aha moment of Dr. Choi's comparative research. Let's look at the exact same word, fire. To an ancient Greek philosopher in the West, fire was a physical object. It was matter, a substantial, literal component of the world. But to a philosopher in the East, fire wasn't a physical block at all. It was a behavior. It was a changing attribute, a specific type of upward-moving energy or meaning. Same exact word, but two entirely different realities. Matteo Ricci, a Western missionary living in the East, actually captured this divide perfectly. He served as an incredibly insightful, impartial bridge between these two worlds. He noted that while the West built their correlative thought out of literal substance, the Eastern yin-yang and five phases built their thought out of attributes. It's just a profound historical synthesis that beautifully contrasts these two completely distinct worldviews. Moving right along to Section 3, the climax, modern atomism. So those ancient ideas of earth, water, fire, and wind, they eventually evolved into something way more powerful and far more granular in the modern era. This worldview escalated in three logical steps. First, it established that all things are composed of microscopic atoms and molecules. Second, by understanding those tiny parts, humans gain the ability to analytically control the material world. And third, this unprecedented control directly drove the massive boom of material civilization as we know it today. The microscope essentially went into overdrive. And, we absolutely have to neutrally acknowledge the objective success of this worldview. Dr. Choi's research points out that this relentless focus on material substance became the core foundation for rapid scientific development. It spurred technological innovation that our ancestors couldn't have even comprehended, and it served as the driving force of modern industrial society. The microscope worked. It literally built the modern world you're sitting in right now. But that leads us to Section 4, the resolution, the crisis of modernity. Because every lens has a blind spot, right? The research argues that by focusing our microscope exclusively on material substance, humanity effectively shattered its wide-angle lens. A worldview biased purely toward material things, toward the analytical and the atomistic, completely collapses the divine interconnected system of the universe. It's like we became so obsessed with the individual gears of a clock that we entirely forgot how to tell time. By obsessing over the parts, we lost sight of the whole. And as philosophical imbalance has led to some pretty dire consequences. The absolute pinnacle of our material success birthed what the research describes as the existential crisis of modernity. We are now facing a total collapse of the spiritual or divine framing of the cosmos, and we're suffering from an extreme bias toward material reductionism. By tearing away that relational, attributist view of reality, this purely material perspective actually risks leading the world to the brink of annihilation. So this isn't just dusty ancient philosophy, it's the actual root of our modern feeling of disconnection and the ecological brinksmanship we see on the news every single day. Which leaves us with one massive ultimate question. We've mastered the substance of reality, sure, but we've completely neglected its attributes. As our material knowledge continues to grow at an exponential rate, can we survive the collapse of our interconnected spiritual universe? It's a wildly provocative thought, and it challenges us to finally look beyond the microscope, to find a way to balance the physical building blocks of the West with the harmonious relational connections of the East. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning and keep asking what reality is really made of.